Welcome. As you can see, this is Stephen, as you know. This is my presentation for Assessment Task 2 about the ongoing large-scale study called TIMS, or Trends in International Mathematics and Science Study, which is a STEM-based survey, and STEM being science, technology, engineering, mathematics. It's conducted every 4 years, starting since 1995, and includes up to 64 countries. It creates an enormous amount of information, and this is evidenced by the graphic on the left here, which shows all of the databases created by the 2015 TIMS. Other than this, I will not repeat my findings from Assessment Task 1, except to state, as I said, this is an enormous study generating equally enormous amounts of educational data. It has required a lot of reading and comprehension to establish how it works, what its objectives are, and how the results are disseminated. Sticking to the assessment task brief, this is how I propose to present my findings about how TIMS 2015 and 2019 reports have had an impact globally, but mostly how it impacts STEM education in Australia. Further to this, I'll focus on my home state, South Australia, to see how it's responded to the TIMS findings. As you can see, I need to base this on my context, of which I can say that first up, I'm a casual facilitator at Torrens, as most know, as for 5 years now. But in the context of being a parent and this STEM subject, I have 5 children, 4 of which are daughters. And as an engineer, from a very young age, I encourage them to take on STEM subjects or to excel at them, always help them with the homework. But they were not really supported in primary school or secondary school, despite my best efforts of encouragement. Funny enough, my son excelled at STEM from primary to secondary and graduated with a double honours degree in engineering. Is this an indication of how females in STEM were categorised 10 plus years ago? That indeed TIMS studies previously concluded. On the left is the cover for TIMS 2015 Australia report, or the results from Australia. That was published in late 2017, so 2 years after this the TIMS survey was done. It was done by the Australian Council of Education Research, or ACER, compared with the report on the right, which is 2019, that was published late 20, suggesting it only took 1 year to produce. So maybe the government allocated more resources to STEM to speed up these reports. This is the cover of the quoted 2015 National STEM Education Strategy produced by the federal government. It's only 12 pages long, and it recommended the 5 areas of national action, also shown there, which is the executive summary, all of which represent high-level, long-term goals and objectives without any of the details explained from the TIMS 2015 reports, such things that I will focus on shortly. Just to quickly summarise the issues that both 2015 and 2019 identified with STEM in education, both studies produce the same statistical conclusions. If you are female, Indigenous, live in a rural area, or have a lower socio-economic home situation, you are likely to be years behind in STEM education. For example, a combination of rural and low socio-economic combined were identified to be approximately 1.5 years behind urban well-off students. Interesting. However, the article on the right suggests something else that counters these findings. It's actually from China. Well, it's not from China, but it's about China. There were 3 very poor districts in China that fell within the top 10 countries or regions, districts in mathematics, suggesting that it could be more about teacher quality as opposed to student contexts. Interesting. Supporting this idea, I've investigated progress by the State Education Department by reviewing their annual reports. They are freely available on the State Government Education Department website, and so I went back to 2014 to use that as a baseline. It has a nice cover, as you can see, with an executive summary, which tops the list with numeracy and literacy initiatives, which is kind of like referring to STEM before STEM became a buzzword. And apparently in Australia, 2015 was the first time the STEM acronym cracked crept into a state government report, despite it being used regularly overseas or internationally 10 years prior to that time. Next is the 2015 annual report. Again, the executive summary starts with the NAP plan. On the NAP plan, or National Assessment Program of Literacy and Numeracy, again, it's kind of STEM, which started in 2008 and is conducted annually by all schools and all students. There's no real mention of the word STEM or the acronym STEM or numeracy and literacy, but as previous reports, but by default, NAP plan is exactly that. To get a little deeper into the 2015 to 2016 transition year into STEM becoming a top priority, I found a series of Education Council communique newsletters, again available freely on the internet. Two shown here are extracts, and they clearly show that from the September issue, STEM was the number 2 item on the agenda, and by December, the December issue, STEM became the number 1 item on the agenda. This becomes clear and evident in the 2016 annual report following. Next up is the 2016 state report, again with a nice cover, an executive summary, but suddenly STEM is on the top of the list. Primarily, I assume, because of the 2015 TIMS reports that came out shortly before this, followed by the National STEM School Education Strategy report late in 2015, as I've discussed previously. So we start to see a trickle-down effect into the state reports, followed by a range of actions, well, one assumes anyway. It's now 2017, and apart from the department planning on changing its name, as shown on the next slide, again, the front page has lost its colourful photos of kids. The executive summary of the report has disappeared. It's now shown as a list of objectives, and there's no STEM to be found. Again, moving forward to 2018, again, the drab front cover, no photos of kids. Again, the executive summary has been dropped, and it's no longer objectives they're talking about. Now it's key strategies. And again, there's no mention of STEM. Also interesting. Again, in 2019, the same front cover, again, no executive summary, and key strategies is moved on to become strategic focus. Again, there is no mention of STEM, despite the fact that the 2019 results will be released later that year, because these reports come out in March every year. Lastly, the 2020 annual report. Again, a plain cover, no executive summary, and again, a table showing the department's strategic focus. And lastly, again, no mention of STEM directly. And this reminds me of a monopolistic state water authority I was engaged with for 23 years. At the start, back in 1995, the organisation operated like an engineering department, and it was, but it slowly transformed from a water and sewerage business to a customer service organisation where all the engineering just happened in the background, mostly outsourced now, and they bolstered all resources around making sure the customer was happy, focusing on stakeholder management. I may be cynical, but I feel this is what happened to an extent in this state education department, where the content is not as important as the context, focusing on keeping students and parents happy as key stakeholders. And they don't want them to be unhappy, which is true, but you still need to keep an eye on what and why and where and who of content. Or it could be just me. So maybe the State Department just had a short burst of STEM fever? So the previous slides showed the progress from 2014 to 2020 in my state, South Australia, which encompassed, in effect, 2 cycles of the TIMS. And I've shown how it can affect and influence policies, initiatives and interventions at state level. It would appear that not much happened based on the last 6 slides. But since 2019, the TIMS 2019, the State Education Department has a keener eye for all things STEM. As shown here are the 3 Australia reports. Volume 1 is 190 pages about student performance. Volume 2, 174 pages about context for learning. And the supplement, as shown there, of nearly 400 pages is a guide to explain all the questions asked and the responses received, affirming my point before about how much reading is required to comprehend the magnitude of these studies. They are enormous. This is an infographic I produced myself and used to gather my thoughts as a kind of mind map. And I use mind maps a lot, that I can follow from top of the tree down to the bottom and back up again, including the next two mind maps I also made. It starts with the 2015 TIMS report that leads to the reports on the left, the federal and state interventions. Primarily the federal government produced the National STEM School Education Strategy 2016 to 26 at the end of 2015 for distribution to the states and territories. And I see that it was endorsed by all states and territories within the same month. I don't think that's normal in politics. How was it endorsed so quickly? This is my next mind map that connects to the first one above, previous slide, where it's coming down from the federal report in response to TIMS that identified the interventions list above, and on the left that shows what they developed for each state. So for example, 6 for Tasmania, 7 for Western Australia, etc. And there were ones that were applicable nationally, as shown on the bottom left, of which there are 12 shown. So they also apply to South Australia, and to South Australia specifically on the top right, identified there were 4 interventions on the map, as shown on the map, sorry. The state government then took these 16 interventions aimed at SA and produced its own report on how it might implement them all, create education policy, drive budgets and lead to change. My last mind map, which shows how the state government responded to the Educational Council report, which is shown above in mind map 2, where it identified 2 streams of interventions as shown in this mind map. Firstly, for teachers and school interventions, followed by students, families and community interventions, which I'll talk about shortly. From this slide onwards, I'll highlight a selection of STEM initiatives rolled out by the state government after the 2015 TIMS report trickled down to school level. Community STEM events was one of the interventions identified in the state report, and I was lucky enough to take the granddaughters to Edinburgh Air Base in November 2019. Apart from watching all the planes and the jets flying around, we also visited the Astro STEM Workshops Pavilion and watched a whole bunch of different things, including VR flight simulators as listed there. I've always been interested in VR, and I teach my granddaughters how to use their headsets, which I have one just there, and very, very interesting, but good work and well funded. This is another intervention that addresses community aspirations for STEM events, creating hobbies for out-of-school activities such as the Robo-Roos, as identified there. As I said, I've got 2 rentals at Murray Bridge, and they're both occupied by high school STEM teachers. Fiona is an old friend of mine, known for 20 years maybe now, and her father runs Robo-Roos, robotics hobby school classes, weekends, and she's been involved for many years as well. And she wanted to introduce it to the Murray Bridge High School as an eligible SACE subject. And because I was doing this subject and the Graduate Certificate of Learning Teaching and a bit about curriculum, she asked my help, and so 2 years of developing and negotiating with management. The first class for Year 11 this year started a robotics class for SACE Stage 1. And it's pretty cool. Addressing one of the intervention objectives identified in TIMS and both federal and state strategic plans was to improve the percentage of females or girls in STEM. So in South Australia, the Education Department has partnered with UNISA to fund the STEM Girls Academy, and it looks like it's still going and it's quite successful. The State Department, via a $250 million budget allocation, identified 139 primary and secondary schools that were uniquely positioned to be part of STEMworks and become a STEMworks school, as shown on the map here on the right. Note that it shows 1 in Murray Bridge, but it's not the high school that I mentioned previously with my tenant Fiona and her high school robotics class. Her high school failed to attract any STEM funding. However, it did receive $2.5 million from the infrastructure education budget towards a new teaching block that was purpose-built to attract STEM funding in subsequent years, and that's where she hosts her robotic classes mentioned above. Another intervention that was federally and state recognised was the lack of Indigenous children involved with STEM. So the state government funded a start, the South Australian Aboriginal Training Academy, of which there are 3 types of academy: school-based, sport-specific and STEM-focused. The slides on the right shows the locations of the schools in the metro and rural areas. So this addresses 2 interventions for STEM, for Indigenous students and for rural students, so it's good. So on a personal note, I was born in Port Augusta, but I grew up in Whyalla for the next 17 years, where I completed my primary, secondary and tertiary education there. The primary school I went to closed 20 years ago, and the secondary school I went to closed just last year, as the Education Department has built a brand new super school to replace the 3 high schools, and they all changed down to become reception to grade 6 schools. The new Whyalla school, it's called Whyalla Secondary College, not a high school anymore, was designed to promote all things STEM, opened this year, as in January this year, and this intervention is designed to reverse the rural inequalities for students. Another federal and state intervention was upskilling teachers in readiness for STEM, or upgrade their STEM teaching skills, and develop programs to assist teachers as much as possible. Examples are the resource toolkit as shown below, and then encouragement for teachers and schools to develop their own STEM initiatives. Creating such initiatives can lead to schools applying for up-and-coming grants for additional resources, infrastructure, equipment, or additional funds for community programs, industry network partners, or maybe even new teachers or teachers' aides. Another intervention identified by federal and state government departments was the need to introduce STEM to children as early as possible. So the State Education Department has produced information brochures for babies, toddlers and preschoolers to help parents give their child a great start. This intervention of STEM scholarships addresses that relating to the group of students that were underrepresented in STEM statistics, identified in both the 2015 and 2019 TIMS, namely females or girls, Indigenous and low socio-economic homes. This scholarship, however, is targeted at science and mathematics for Safe Stage 1 and Safe Stage 2. It does not include students in private schools or rural areas, which was in fact one of the intervention areas that was identified in 15 and 19 TIMS. So I thought that was a particularly strange exclusion. Still good, but here are some of my basic conclusions. Yes, it's been fun and rewarding exercise, somewhat unexpected compared to what I thought we would be doing in week 1, but it's opened my eyes as to how much goes on in the background of the world of education that the average Joe would never know about. And I can now see where the $33 billion state budget goes to in education. It's big business. I did have 10 more slides. There's so much I wanted to say about this topic, but I had to keep it to 20 minutes in line for the brief. So thank you for watching, and thank you for your excellent facilitation and feedback, Pam. Thank you.